please, for right now. Okay. This always makes me either want to, well, that's okay. Like class. No, but we're here tonight. None of us had any particular announcements. Check your email. And I'm just going to sit down, and if there are a lot of people here. It looks great. I don't know if you can see. Yeah, they're not. But say hi. At some point, we will have a camera up and running to record events like this, but it won't be tonight. It can't find my phone even and stuff. So anyway, need more practice, need more time. I will hush and let Darsha turn things over to introduce our guest speaker tonight.
Hi, guys. We've got Bill Flatley here tonight. Will, not Bill. Don't call him Bill. His name's Will. William Flatley, PhD. With us tonight. Come on up. I've got a couple of questions for you by way of introduction. I think I'm funny, so you'll just have to bear with me on that. Yeah, see, they already pretended to laugh. So you went to Dartmouth for undergrad?
I did.
Are you from that part of the world, or?
I went to high school in Connecticut.
Okay,
Yeah, and have a mom from Tennessee and a dad from Philadelphia.
okay.
So a Yankee and a Southern.
Yeah, that's an interesting combination. And then you ended up at ATM,
Yeah.
Texas A&M, and so it was kind of a downward spiral as you get more educated.
Yeah.
No, it's really a great school. It is, I
Thank
know. And then you, did you decide not to be a Texan after living there for a few years, or?
I married a Texan
Okay,
and
yeah.
decided, yeah.
See, my point.
I will say that I went to Texas really not thinking very much of Texas. And then I lived there for like
Yeah.
8 years and married a Texan. So
Yeah, so, yeah, it grows on you. Kind of like mold or something. Moss. I meant to say moss there. And then, you do a lot of work with environmental history and forest ecology. And you're gonna talk with us about that a bit tonight.
Yeah.
And your tree, whatever your tree program is, we'll know what that is when the meeting's over. So you're a geographer. Can you tell us the difference between physical and cultural geography?
Yeah, I thought you were gonna ask me about escape now.
You can tell us about that too.
Difference between, well, so I'm a physical geographer. And we really have a split between physical and human geography.
Right,
And sometimes we get along, sometimes we don't get along.
No,
We come
I know.
from sort of different perspectives. And I teach a course on physical geography, which is basically just the natural world versus science. We've got climatologists, geomorphologists. I'm a biogeographer, so I think about the specifically focus on the biological solar system. And then cultural geography, so that's a little bit tougher because it's in human geography.
yeah, well, human geography.
I do, and so studying culture and the human society from a geographic perspective. And actually that I do tend to, and maybe this is why I'm a geographer. I like forest systems, the natural world, but I'm also really interested in how humans interact. Yeah.
And I know you do a soil, you teach a soils class as
Yeah.
well. And so do you have a favorite type of soil? I know your students shouldn't hear you say
Yeah,
what it is.
prepper. So I like the Stuttgart series, which actually happens to be the Arkansas state soil.
Yes,
Yeah, and also because there's it's not the Stuttgart, but there's a soil with a fragipan in it, which is like this dense layer about 1.5 feet down. in the prairie at UCA, the Jewelmore Nature Reserve is like a nature reserve we have on campus, and we just went on to record that soil last week. It was really pretty.
That's cool, yeah. And how do you feel about glades? Do you have a favorite glade or place in the Washita?
I do, yeah, so I'm gonna talk a little bit about
Okay,
Devil's Knob, Devil's Backbone.
and do they keep all the geographers in the basement at UCA?
No, because, no, well, we don't have geologists there, so they can't.
Yeah.
They can't discriminate against us.
Well, that's why you don't have geologists, so. And are you a fire boss? Do you do much with fire ecology?
No, well, so I do study fire ecology. I'm not a burn boss because, I don't want anything to do with life.
I agree with you on that. Okay, so we're gonna let you roll with it here,
Okay.
Will,
Yeah,
not Bill.
yeah. my
William?
dad's-
Is he? Oh, okay. And she's gonna get you screen sharing here.
Thank you.
She's gonna-
Well, thank you all for coming. There are a few familiar faces in here, and so that's always nice. Great, perfect. Okay. Yeah, so thanks for inviting me. I'm looking forward to talking to you all and sort of tonight, I'm gonna sort of wide ranging. I'm gonna talk a little bit about Tree Street's an organization that I'm the president for right now for another year that plants trees in Little Rock. And then I'll transition into talking a bit about my research and tree rings and fire in forests. And so, yeah, talk about vegetation and fire in Arkansas. And I don't know if I'll get to the beyond part, but we'll definitely talk about vegetation and fire in Arkansas. I'm Will Flatley. I'm associate professor in the Department of Geography at UCA. I've been there for 7 years, got tenure last year, so that's good. And I am I'm a biogeographer. There's my card right up there. I actually have some cards here as well. I'll pass around. That's me standing in Great Smoky Mountains National Park in an old growth oak and tulip poplar forest that I did some of my dissertation work. And so I'm a geographer. I actually studied history in undergrad at Dartmouth, and then I studied forestry at Virginia Tech in the forestry department there. And I think that, I wanted to work in some kind of natural resources work in environmental science. And I really liked the aspect of forestry that there's a management component to it, right? So you are studying natural systems, forests, but there's also a piece of it that is involved in active management, right? And managing for particular objectives with forests. Then I went to Texas A&M and eventually Northern Arizona University and got into fire ecology. So thinking about how does fire affect forests? And how does frequent fire, right, influence forests, the types of trees that you get regenerating, the structure of the forest, the understory, all influenced by fire, a disturbance process that is killing particular organisms and opening up space for other organisms. I was in Northern Arizona University where I did my postdoc before coming to UCA. So yeah, tree rings, I'm a dendrochronologist, so biogeographer, forest ecologist, fire ecologist, and then dendrochronologist. Dendro, trees, chronology is dating, right, or age. So I look at I use tree rings to better understand tree growth and forest processes, particularly disturbance. Okay, so, and feel free to interrupt me, ask questions as we're going along. I teach classes, so I can kind of roll with it if you have questions as we're going along. Okay, yeah, so the talk outline, I'll start by talking about street trees and ecosystem services. So why would we want to plant, or do you want to give up your Saturday and go out and plant trees in Arkansas? And then I'll talk about some of my research in Arkansas, particularly on frequent fire ecosystems. And my favorite glade, as I was mentioning, Devil's Knob, Devil's Backbone is a glade natural heritage site, or a natural area that is managed by the Arkansas Natural Heritage Commission. And then this study at Lake Winona in an old growth shortleaf pine forest, and thinking about disturbance, particularly fire, and how changes in fire have altered that system, particularly the removal of fire. And then maybe a little bit on through lines. Okay. All right, so yeah, so Tree Streets right now, yeah, going way too long. Tree Streets, Little Rock, you can go to. We just revamped our website, so it's relatively brand new. And you can go on there and check out what we're doing. Basically, it's an organization, and we plant native trees in downtown Little Rock. We plant them between the sidewalk and the curb along streets, and really trying to maintain tree cover in downtown, and continue kind of planting the next generation of trees as ones that have been there for a while, right? The trees eventually age out and die if they don't get knocked down by a storm. And so we're typically trying to fill in gaps in tree cover along streets in downtown Little Rock. So I'm talking about Tree Streets. I like to just kind of think of like different cities that I've been to, where you just kind of like think of them as like the trees are part of portions of these. So in Barcelona, Savannah, Georgia, particularly the live oaks, right, that you think of along streets there. But also Houston, Texas, we live right along this Buffalo Bayou Park when I was there, and a great green resource with shade in places in downtown Houston, or New York City has Central Park. So it's something that can really make a city more livable, and that we certainly appreciate out here in Little Rock. Okay, so but aside from just drawing tourists in, and having these pretty trees along streets, there's a whole range of benefits that you get from trees. And we talk typically about ecosystem services. I don't know if you all have heard that term before, but essentially it is the direct or indirect benefits that people draw or gain from an ecosystem. Okay, so and with trees, we can think about a whole range of these ecosystem services that are benefits that often we take for granted. Like, we don't really think about trees providing us necessarily with clean air or clean water, but they do, right? So trees filter pollutants out of the air, and they make for cleaner air for people to breathe in cities. They filter water. They tend to, reduce runoff due to their leaf canopies. But they're particularly important in terms of climate change if we think about heat reduction for cities. So you have a lot of tree cover, Those trees are absorbing incoming solar radiation and carrying out photosynthesis. And that energy is not being absorbed by the roofs of buildings or by sidewalks.
Hello, kitten.
And that will make a big difference, people talk about the urban heat island effect, and you can look at maps of cities and you can see heat concentrated in urban areas. They're not talking to me, I don't think. Areas that don't have a lot of tree cover, and actually they're often this is often associated with areas that are disadvantaged, that have less money to plant and maintain trees. And so, right, that's another sort of benefit that we can provide in terms of heat reduction. So just for human health, also reducing energy bills, aesthetics, right? It's just pretty to have trees along street line trees, recreation, climate change again. Trees store carbon. So that's a benefit. As they grow, they are pulling carbon out of the air and storing it in wood and plant growth. And then, you know, they're a whole, like if we look at reducing rates of cardiac disease, strokes, and asthma, this is something put together by the Nature Conservancy, reducing levels. There's a whole range of benefits to human health, right, and economic benefits that planting trees provides. It actually, they've done studies and shown that people drive slower on streets that are tree lined. So I don't know if that's because they're worried about swerving off and hitting a tree, or if they're just, you know, enthralled by the beauty of the trees as they drive by. But you know, there are a range of different benefits for planting trees. So has everybody heard when's the best time to plant a tree?
25 years ago.
Yeah, 25, 30, maybe 50 or 100 years ago. But yeah, so I'd say, so the next best time to plant a tree is today. And the next best time is tomorrow. The picture. So it is, right, it's important. We've particularly seen this recently in Little Rock with storms bringing down trees downtown. Right? Trees are not permanent. They grow, they age, they start dropping limbs, and in a storm may blow over. And so, and it takes time to grow a tree, right? So if you go back here, right? So this tree's not throwing a whole bunch of shade yet, but right, with forethought planting, we can have the next generation of trees coming up and replacing trees as they start to die back. Okay, so a little pitch. So this is actually a map of the areas that we plant in. So we basically, in this downtown area between South Woodrow, Roosevelt, and then over to 30, and then up to 630. So that block includes like the Quapaw district, the area around the governor's mansion, and the green is areas that we planted. They've been doing, so I've just been working with Tree Streets for, I guess, about 6 years now. But it started by John Baker, and he started it in 1996. He came back and went to law school in St. Louis. And he just had noted in St. Louis and did not have any trees there. So when he came back, he thought, you know, this is something important to continue to have this tree cover in Little Rock. So I'll pass this around. If you're interested in putting your name on there and your email and your mailing address, I'll put you into our system, and we just send out. We don't pester you all the time. You'll get like one fundraising letter a year. And then we also send out announcements of when we're doing planting. And so that's what we're really looking for. Is we're always looking for volunteers to come out, help plant trees. We get together on Saturday mornings. We meet at Community Bakery at 9 a.m. It's not too early. And usually we're out for about 2 hours until 11 a.m., maybe noon. We'll provide you with all the tools you need. You need to bring a shovel. And grandchildren, children also, dogs, all welcome to come and help plant. We do have our oh man, I didn't call that. Okay, our fall winter planting schedule is listed out here. You can also, this is not actually up on the website. And actually, if you want to, you can go on to the website, and there's a spot there for you to sign up for our emails and get on our contact list. So come and join us sometime and plant trees. Yeah.
You get the presenters to use the presentation mode, so those of us on Zoom.
Oh yeah, are they not seeing the slides right now?
No, I think they can see one line of you and see you.
Oh, okay. So you want me to stand? You want me to stand here? Yeah.
You know.
Okay. Sure. Yeah. Okay. That'll be Yeah, so I understand Zoom folks. I may wander off from time to time. This is like I said, it's what I'm used to doing as I teach. I kind of like walk around.
Can I interject, please?
What's that?
Can I interject, please?
Sure.
You're also in outline mode. We can't see your slides. They're too small.
Okay. That's not it. I don't know how to change that on your computer.
Well, I'm not sure either. Sorry about that.
Use the slideshow presentation.
Trying to get to it.
If you could also, if you can't figure that out, you could also change the screen and
Yes.
share a different screen. If you can share the presentation screen, then you don't have to worry about the outline mode.
You try and click-
Even that's better. It's bigger than it was before, but
Yeah, but move up to the slideshow.
How's that?
there we go.
There you
Yeah.
go.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
This was hard.
No, that's okay. Don't worry about it. Yeah. Okay. All right, now it's on Zoom, but we're not seeing it.
The thing came loose.
There we go. Okay. Okay. Sure. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, so the question was just whether Tree Streets has always been downtown. Yeah, so that's the has always been the area of planting. There are other so there's another organization I think that plants trees in Hillcrest. And as far as I'm aware, that's the only other group that plants trees. Yeah, not us. Yeah.
With the recent tornado in March,
Uh-huh.
y'all, are y'all having any plans to cut those trees?
Yeah, so we have talked about it. We haven't specifically, and part of the thought is that it's just going to take like a little while to get to the point where they're planting trees. But we talked a little bit about so someone from the Audubon Society contacted us and was looking into that, and it's something that we've kind of been interested in. We don't have plans to do it yet, but yeah, that would be. I mean, that neighborhood is an area where, right, they've lost all of their trees, and that'll be important to get trees planted again. Okay. Okay. So moving on from Tree Streets and talking a little bit about, as I promised in the title, talking about fire. And vegetation. And I like to show this slide in my physical geography class. So I have a bunch of students in this class that are non-majors. And this is like the one lab science that they're going to take. And so we're learning about the Earth system and just kind of get some comments on, right, what do they think about fire? Good thing, bad thing, indifferent. And talk about it. This is a pretty dramatic shot of this is from Shenandoah National Park in Virginia. And right, a high severity fire burning up that ridge and removing forest. But there are a range of different kinds of fire. And that's one of the things that really makes it interesting to study as a geographer, because as you go from one place to another, fire is going to change with different climates, right? You may have a lot of fire, you may have less fire, but you also might get lower severity fires that are just burning through the understory, like this one burning through a pine oak forest. And these species are adapted. They have thick bark, they sprout. They're adapted to this type of a disturbance regime that's going to open up the forest and provide light into the understory that they need to get established, particularly oaks and pines. And humans are another piece of this equation, right? We have fires that are started by lightning, but a lot of fires are also started by people. I have another figure that I show in my class showing the number of fires over the course of the year, and you just see this huge spike right on the 4th of July, right? We talk about what's causing this pattern. Yeah. So I'm going to talk about fire and some ecosystems that are dependent on fire in Arkansas. One of them is shortleaf pine, big bluestem woodlands. You can see from the name of this ecosystem type, right, that trees are important. So shortleaf pine in these forests, but big bluestem, the understory, the grass and herbaceous layer is a key component of this forest type. And burning through this forest keeps it relatively open and allows sunlight to get into the understory and support the diversity of species that are found in the understory. There's really only one tree, right? So there's very little tree diversity, tree species diversity in shortleaf pine woodland, big bluestem woodland, but all the diversity is down there on the ground. And I don't know, do you all interact with Theo Witzel? Right, so he works for the Arkansas Natural Heritage Commission. He taught to my class, and he used this term of groceries on the ground, where you have a lot of the energy resources, a lot of the food resources are here in the understory, right, and available for insects, for birds, for other wildlife that is going to support a diversity of often, native species. If you remove fire from this system, right, it turns into something more like this, where you've got a dense forest. It's shaded in the understory. You can't even really see the ground there, but there is much less diversity, much less plant growth, because there's just not as much sunlight getting down there. Or this is the Railroad Prairie Natural Area. I'm gonna just move this up first. Down near Devall's Bluff, Arkansas. So this is actually a treeless system, right? Open prairie. There are trees surrounding it. And again, a huge diversity of herbaceous and grass species. So you're probably thinking this is weird. He's a tree person. He's going to talk about tree rings. Why is he talking about the absence of trees? Okay. So, all right, so I'm going to now make a pitch for why Arkansas is so fascinating to study. I talked about this with my biogeography class. I should talk in earth system science. We have this diversity of soils, of landforms, but we also have a lot of endemic diversity. And an important part of this are fire-maintained systems and areas that are pushed towards grasslands from a forested condition, right? So getting a little bit ahead of myself, but we look at it, this diagram is great because it's just kind of laying out biogeography in one slide here. And so if we think about precipitation gradient right here, and then we've sort of got these different biome types or ecosystem types that are associated with either the drier end of the precipitation spectrum or the wetter end. And then temperature here, right? So we're getting cooler as we go higher up. And you could also think about this as like latitude here, right? So in the tropics, right, as we go from dry to wet, we're going from hot desert to grasslands to then tropical rainforest. This is a bit closer to our latitude here, temperate desert, short grass, tall grass prairie on the plains, and then you get deciduous forests as you get into the eastern US where it's wetter. Or we could look at it like this. So we could actually plot out, right, if we're more of a quantitative audience, and look at, so we just got mean annual precipitation over here, and then temperature cooling as we go up. And then we could plot out these different biomes from, right, in the mid latitudes, temperate grassland, temperate deciduous forest, and then temperate rainforest. And so there's this transition. Trees require a lot of water, right? We've got to go out and water the trees after we plant them downtown for tree streets, usually for a year or two. Trees require a lot of water. When you get drier, you lose the trees and you tend to shift towards a grassland. Grasses can survive in a much drier environment. So this brings up the question of, all right, so in Arkansas, right, this is just showing us precipitation in the US. And right, Western US is just a big jumble, right? It's mainly responding to elevation and then rain shadows. But in the Eastern US, we can see that, so there's a rain shadow from the Rockies that is creating really dry conditions out on the prairie, and then it just sort of gets wetter as you move further east. And so we're sitting here, we're well within that eastern deciduous forest, but you know, if you drive, like if you ever drive out to New Mexico, right, you get into Oklahoma, you start to get like kind of more spread out trees, you have post oaks, stunted trees, it gets drier, and then eventually you just get out onto grassland, tall grass, and then eventually short grass prairie. So why do we have grasslands in Arkansas, right? We're in a climate that clearly, if we went back here, we're, you know, around in here, we're not too far from the edge, but we get enough precipitation, right? It's humid here. We should have mostly forest rather than grassland. But there are particular things that can tip us over from forest to grassland, right? That can exclude, let me move this so that we can do this, can shift things. Here, I'm gonna put it over here. Yeah. No, they'll still be able to, we just can't see them. So this is a diagram from this book, Forgotten Grasslands in the South. Anybody read Austin's? Yeah, so it's a great book about grasslands in the southeastern US. And highlighting the fact that there were grasslands all over the Southeast, but usually those were the first things that were converted either to pasture or agriculture, right? You didn't have to clear, often flat areas, and so most of these areas have been converted, and you've sort of forgotten that grasslands are an important component of ecosystems in the Southeast. The diagram up here, this is so showing sort of a conceptual model of, we've got grasslands right here, and then they are being influenced by these other factors, their feedbacks as well. But one is just climate, right? So you get a grassland if you have a drier climate, and it just excludes trees. So out on the plains, right, it's dry enough out there that trees just don't survive except along the rivers. Hydro periods, sometimes if the soils flood, can make it really hard for trees as well. So actually you can have too much water. Substrate and landform, really thin soil. So glades, balds, and barrens that just have really poor soils that don't hold water are harsh and can be difficult for trees to get established. Herbivores, large herbivores, right? We have fewer of these days roaming around, but bison, you go back even further, mastodon, right? Were grazing and promoting grasses, typically also perhaps damaging trees, and could potentially push a forested area into a grassland. And then here, my favorite, one of my favorites, fire as well, can shift. So if you burn, you're killing seedlings, preventing trees from establishing. And generally, the more you burn, the more frequently you burn, you're going to reduce forest density until potentially you reach a grassland condition or something, you know, in between with a woodland, a more open forest. Okay. All right, so two little definitions here. So what this means is that we have these little islands or patches of grassland habitat in Arkansas that are surrounded by forest on areas that have poor soils or maybe burned a lot or were flooded. And so you have these little islands that create disjunct distributions, meaning that they are separated from the larger population on these little islands. That makes for, right, speciation, right? You get unique species because they're isolated in these little patches, and that produces a bunch of endemic species. So you have these grasses, insects that are, right, isolated from the larger prairies in the central US, in Arkansas, in Florida, in the Southeast, that are isolated from reproducing with those other populations, and you get these unique species. So again, this is thanks to Reed Noss. If you look at, so these are some different genus, Anthropogon, Sargastrum, some different flowering species and grass species. And so in the broader prairie region, we've got 2, 1 species, 10 in this case, and then a whole bunch of different species within those genuses in grasslands in Florida, North Carolina, Louisiana. Arkansas didn't make this list, but we had diversity as well. Yeah, I know, I always neglected. Okay, so so I told you that, so these communities, grasslands, are important components of the natural heritage, right, of native ecosystems in Arkansas. And there's an interest in managing for them, but we have noticed that these systems are changing, right? So, and possibly the removal of fire. It could be the removal of grazing in some of these locations. Some of them were maintained by thin soils, right? So part of sort of understanding how to manage and potentially reintroducing fire back into these systems is understanding, okay, how frequently do they burn? What season did they burn? How long have they not burned for? And this is all information that we can find with tree rings. This is, if you've never been to Devil's Knob, Devil's Backbone, this is a screenshot from a YouTube video with like a drone flying around it, which is really cool to have that footage of a site that I've worked at. But it's these 2 knobs right here, like a sandstone ridge that connects them. And right there, a range of endemic species found on that particular bulb.
Where is that?
It's in it's north of Mountain View. Yeah, right across the White River. From like the Angler, you know where that, there's like a big restaurant there. So that, and there's debate over this, right? So talking about glades, there are people that think fire played a really big role in maintaining these glades. Other people are more skeptical of the use of fire, and it is expensive to burn, right? You got to take a crew out there. Somebody's got to be liable. They got to do the training to be a burn boss. So, right, we want strong evidence, right, in order to support our management. All right, so that's where I potentially come in, and to look at, to do a study to try and reconstruct the fire regime at a particular location. And tree rings can be really useful to do this. We don't cut down old growth trees, living trees. That was a dead tree. Mostly it's like stumps that are still out there that maybe have been out there for 100 years that just aren't decaying because they're on a dry site. They've got a lot of resin in the areas that are scarred. And so we can go out there, we can sample trees that have this sort of telltale cavity on them that shows that they've got a bunch of scars on it. And we can collect it and we can look at, so you can actually see scars along here, right? Those are all individual scars. This one's got a bunch of scars on as well. These are 2 students, Lily and AJ, that worked with me and did a great job. And this one we've gone back to the lab and we have sanded it, make it look real pretty. That's actually like the best looking sample you ever get. They never look that good. But you can see that, so we've got a pith date of 1826, and then each of these are fire scars right here that we're able to date. This process of cross dating, where we're looking at the narrow and wide rings that match up generally with climate. And so we can even sample, as I was saying before, dead trees and fit them into that pattern and figure out the exact date that fires were occurring. There's a close-up of fire scars. This was this is at Texas A&M. They had somebody doing media that was taking really beautiful photos. Okay, so this is, and how long are we really going to, like 7:30? Yeah, okay. All right, so this is, you can see the two devil knobs right there. And then these triangles are where we collected this fire history information. You can't just go out and get it anywhere, right? You got to like kind of find where it is and sample it where it is. So ideally, we would have had a bunch of samples up on the Glade, but we didn't find that. Yeah, and I'll show some other suggestions for why we didn't find any. That's actually a sample from Devil's Knob, and so scars all along there that we're able to date. That's actually this sample right here. So each of these lines, horizontal lines, is an individual tree, and all the vertical slashes are fires that we were able to date from that particular site. So whole bunch of fire. I know these dates down here are too small for you to see, but throughout this period, we had a fire return interval of, it depends on how you calculate it. And there's like a bunch of debate among academics about what's the appropriate way to do it. But an average of about 5 years between fires at this particular site. So a lot of fire. And then 1940 was the last fire. These were prescribed fires that the Natural Heritage Commission did right there. Always good to see that, because you can check and make sure your dating is matching up with fires when they occurred. Okay. So then, so we've got fire from the surrounding glade. Then we went out and we cored trees in plots up on the glade just to look and see, all right, what's been happening in terms of establishment on the glade. And so, need my pointer here. So just to start with, these are aerial photographs, one from 1946, and then this is from 2020. And you can see, right? So 1946, we've got some cedars down along the lower end. And there are some, this is a winter shot, so there are some hardwoods there as well that you can see shadows from. But basically the entire thing, right, is forested now for the most part. The dark area here is all this cedar that's spread up. And then there are hardwoods on that sandstone ridge. And then we can look at, okay, so if we're trying to figure out without having some age structure, right, it's harder to know, okay, well, what is the change? Maybe it's just been wetter in the last couple decades. But we can look at the fire record, right? So that last fire occurred in 1941. And then we've got that peak in establishment in the decade immediately following the fire. Yeah.
1944, Smokey the Bear.
Yeah. So yeah, Smokey the Bear, they say the most successful public service campaign, right? Convinced everybody to stop burning, right? I mean, not necessarily a bad thing, because like the density, right, that people are living in these areas, you can't necessarily just be burning the woods, right, and lighting a fire and letting it run off. People in the past used to, right, they would often sweep or burn their yards so that when fires did burn from another area, right, they wouldn't burn up and burn up their houses. We may, people might start doing that in California, and deal with their fire issues. So this is providing some evidence, right, that it does look like that removal of fire is a big piece of what is going on in this particular glade, right? And so probably fires, right, burning on the surrounding slopes, running up the hills, and then probably burning at pretty high severity up there on the glades and beating back the trees, the oaks, and the cedars that are established up there now. Okay. That's glades. And then, so I've also worked in shortleaf pine, big bluestem forests, particularly in the spot. Has anybody been to, well, so it's right next to Lake Winona, but there's the Lake Winona Research Natural Area that is on it's the west side of the lake out there. And it doesn't necessarily look, you think about an old growth forest and towering pines, and there are big pine trees out there, but it is filled in with all of this stuff that's come in, right, in the last 100 years or so in the absence of fire. So there are 200, 300-year-old pines, right, that are all being kind of choked out by hardwoods that have come in the absence of fire. So, right, looking kind of something like this. This is what it looks like a lot of times when you go out and hike in the Ouachitas, right, in an area that historically was dominated by shortleaf pine. Or here, right, we've got one kind of shortleaf pine just sort of struggling, right, and then all of these smaller fire intolerant tree species that are growing into the mid-story. So this is a picture from around the turn of the century, right? Very different looking ecosystem. This is from that same area around Lake Winona. Foresters used to be much more stylish than they are today. I need to get some field clothes like that. Or this is out near Mina in the Irons Fork natural area, or sorry, the Irons Fork watershed, which is on the Ouachita National Forest. And again, looking out there, right? So they're trees, right? It's mostly shortleaf pine, but a lot of space. You can see all the sunlight getting into the understory. This was taken in the 20s, right? Before the kicking in of Smokey the Bear and fire suppression. Okay, so this one is just, I'm working on Devil's Knot, putting that into publication, but this one was just published this past year. Dynamic fire regimes and forest conditions across 3 centuries in a shortleaf pine oak forest in the Ouachita Mountains. That's Lily, was the young woman that was pictured early on in this talk. And so we went out, found samples. So the triangles, the white triangles are all fire-scarred samples. We collected about, I think, 70 of these cross sections of wedges of wood out there. And then we put in plots to look and see, what's kind of changed in terms of establishment. And so here's another fire chart. This one's got colors. I went with the UCA colors, purple. And actually, let me move this here. Oh, don't look. Okay. Nope. Okay. All right. So this is thinking about the human element. And so the different colors here are these different land use periods that we looked at. So we've got fire protection, which ran from 1933 until the present, right? So this period, you can see very little fire out there at all. There were a couple fires just after the advent of Smokey the Bear. We go further back, we have EAS, Euro-American settlement. So the period when Euro-American settlers were really starting to arrive in numbers in the 1830s up until the fire suppression period. And you can see a whole bunch of fires during that period. If we calculate a fire return interval, it's about 2.5 years on average. So fires occurring almost every other year. Doesn't mean that the whole place was burning every other year, right? This may have been different locations, but it's not a huge area. We're looking at about 100 acres. Then we go further back here. This is the proto-historic period. So prior to the arrival of Euro-Americans, right, there are Native American communities living in this region, probably using fire and burning. We have less fires from that period. Anybody want to critique me like a reviewer? What's problematic about right, me saying that there are less fires during this period? Okay, so there were less people likely, but just in terms of our data, right, the number of samples goes way down as we get further back in this record. So, it's hard to say, would we have as many fires, right, if we had as many samples as we have during that Euro-American settlement period? I would say that, and there are different ways, again, of calculating. I've argued with reviewers. There's a lot of uncertainty in that, but it does seem to look like fires were slightly less frequent, that when Euro-American settlers arrived, they were burning. They were probably looking to open the forest up for livestock, for grazing of hogs and cattle and sheep. And so, right, fire is, you don't have chainsaws at that point. We don't have feller bunchers, right, and bulldozers. And so fire is a really effective management tool, as it was for Native Americans as well. Okay. And then we can look at, similar to what I showed you with the glade, the age structure over time. So got decades here going towards the present. And then I've got it broken up into shortleaf pine. So that's the white bars here is establishment of shortleaf pine. Don't actually worry about that so much. I should have taken it out. That's not from the plots. These are just trees that we sampled, basically stumps out there. But this is all collected in plots here. And so, and then oak, and then other species. So you can see that, don't have a lot of data from the protohistoric, that's the word. I forget my name. Protohistoric period. We can't say a whole lot about what was going on during that period. But during the Euro-American settlement period, we can see that basically it's just shortleaf pine establishing, right? That makes sense that they were burning really frequently. That's excluding all but the most fire tolerant species, and shortleaf pine is very fire tolerant. Fires end in the 30s, and then you just get this pulse of establishment of no shortleaf pine, but a whole bunch of oaks first, right? And oaks tend to like fire as well. They sprout, but a ton of them coming back in and getting established. And then particularly these other species like ironwood, a fair amount of hickories out there, but species that are not well fire adapted, but they compete better in a lower light environment than shortleaf pine or oaks. They don't have to use resources, right, to get thick bark and other adaptations to fire. Okay, so here is the final little slide, kind of summing up like a conceptual diagram of sort of how we understand fire and then also forest response to fire over time at this particular site. So we've got like our different periods, right? So this is like the protohistoric, like the fire and the fire chart, Euro-American settlement, and then fire protection. And then each of these boxes is kind of showing you generally what our understanding is from this study of what was going on in the forest. And then this gradient is sort of the like frequent fire, open canopy pine end of the spectrum. And then no fire, closed canopy, mesic hardwoods on this end. And so, right, during that protohistoric period, the dotted bars is kind of showing our uncertainty, right? So fire may have been as frequent as it was during the Euro-American settlement period. We just don't have as many samples. It was probably somewhat less frequent. We also have indications from historical surveys that it was more of a mix of oak and pine. Then Euro-American settlement, really frequent fire, low to moderate severity, and basically pine, open woodland structure. That's probably what created those pictures that I showed you, right? Where really open, just shortleaf pine forest was this period of burning. And then today, fire protection, no fire, oak and mesic hardwoods are taking over. Those pines are starting to die. And a closed canopy with a loss of, right, all of the understory species that are adapted to these high light open forest conditions. So just a couple more pictures. This is a picture of shortleaf pine stand on the Ouachita National Forest that they have burned. I think they even burned 3 times here, right? So starting to do this restoration, you can see that, right, they're opening up the understory and you're getting, you know, diversity of grasses and probably flowering species in there. But it's not all about forests. So this is the Cherokee Prairie Natural Area. This kind of went on to the Arkansas Natural Heritage Commission website and used some of their photos. Right, beautiful coneflower, right? In Cherokee Prairie. Let's see. this is a seasonally wet shale glade. So an instance where probably flooding has an important influence on excluding trees and making habitat available for non-tree species. Or, right, our glades. So this is in the Ozarks, a Dolomite Barren McClure glade, where again, that probably has a lot to do with the underlying soils and bedrock, but right, fire probably was playing a role historically as well in keeping this open. Okay, and then I'll just acknowledge to thank the UCA provided some funding when I first got there to get my lab started and get this work going. And then the Forest Service, Southern Research Station, and then also the Arkansas Natural Heritage Commission have been supportive of my research and provided funding to do some of this work. So thank you, and I guess I'll take any questions.
So,
Yeah.
I'm a bit confused because it sounds like that, yeah, we got fire protection, but with fire protection also comes, the understory becomes negligible because there's such a high chance.
Yeah. So, sorry, the question is,
Are we doing a good thing with all this fire protection? Because it seems like we're not providing some of the resources needed.
yeah.
On in that particular area.
Yeah, no, I agree that, and so, and maybe that's like the through line. I need to provide more of a tie up here, but that is, so this research is supporting prescribed burning, right? And that's what, like, I would argue that when I showed you the map and the climate types, right, and was making that argument that Arkansas, a lot of our endemic species, a lot of our diversity here are these fire maintained systems. So when we removed fire, right, those started to change. And it's, we have sort of like small remnants of that left, right? So go back here. So like a devil's knob, devil's backbone. There, you still have like these, right, these species that need a lot of light that are able to survive kind of like on the very edges or the area that we have right around exposed bedrock. And so you have these species that are just sort of hanging on, and right, they're not going to last if we don't do restoration, if we don't start burning to open up and provide more habitat for them. And I mean, the other argument I would make too is that, so species that are adapted to fire typically are also adapted to drought, because areas that are drier tend to burn more frequently. And dealing with climate change, right? So drought is going to become more and more of a problem, right? Just with warmer temperatures, you have more evaporation. Species that adapted to fire are often going to be adapted to the climate that we are moving into. And so that's another important, just sort of increasing the pool of species of diversity that is available to fill gaps, right, as we move on. Does that answer?
Yeah.
Can I ask
Yeah.
a backup question to that? At the beginning, you had said that the prescribed burn theory was still controversial.
Yeah.
And I kind of got the assumption from Quails Forever and the natural heritage people that it was pretty much accepted in land.
So I think land managers are much more on board, right? And I mean, because I think they recognize, right, the species that are being lost, and the valuable habitat, right, that fire maintains. But there continues to be a debate, and some of it is just within academic circles, right? There are people that are skeptical, or they would say that the Forest Service has gone too far, or Quail Forever has gone too far. They're burning too much, right? We just don't have evidence for these fires having occurred at that frequency in the past. So that's part of providing this tree ring record, is to provide evidence of, look, we've got empirical evidence that there were fires occurring, they were occurring at this frequency, and it was an important part of this system. But there are a lot of people that are just skeptical of management of the use of fire, and just are kind of loath to have any kind of management going on in natural areas. And you do have to, like you have to go in, decide to do this burn, and you are affecting the communities there, right? So you're going to have trees that are being killed. So yeah, there is a debate. And then also like when they put forward like a management plan, that can then be challenged, right, in the courts. And so if you have scientific research that can point to, okay, we know that fires are occurring in the past, that can also be helpful in terms of addressing public concern and assuaging people's fears. Yeah.
Well, how prevalent is this type of research? I mean, you're doing here in Arkansas, you're doing it in Arkansas and nationwide, or at least here in the grasslands in the South.
Yeah, so so like in my little narrow niche, people doing tree ring fire histories, not in Arkansas, which is good for me coming here, and people are interested and there's an opportunity. There's a lab at University of Missouri that has done a ton of work up there, and they've also come down. A guy, Richard Guyette and Michael Stambaugh, that have done a lot of this work. And then there are people that are doing this all over the country. It really got started in the Western US, in the Southwest, using it to develop the fire histories of ponderosa pine, right? That was sort of like the longleaf pine here in the Southeast, but then ponderosa pine was one of the systems that we first sort of started realizing that, oh, maybe we created a problem with putting all fires out, right? And it's creating more higher severity fires, where it's changing the ecosystems. So yeah, there are a number. I go to conferences, and there'll be like, 20 other people that are tree ring people that are doing fire history, and we like get all excited about being with other nerds. There's another dendrochronologist, Dave Staley, up at the University of Arkansas. He's really a climatologist, so he uses tree rings to reconstruct climate and do really interesting things like going back 1,000 years, 2,000 years, and looking at changes in precipitation and drought, particularly. He looks at, and then but there are. I meant to mention the Southeastern Grassland Initiative. Is a group that I saw the head of that give a talk a couple of years ago at the Short-Lived Pine Conference. And but they've got a really cool website, and they're doing really interesting things in terms of recognizing this as an imperiled ecosystem in the Southeast, and trying to restore, trying to maintain, trying to harvest seeds, collect seeds, and restore. He is, yeah. So he's one of the, I think he was one of the founders. Yeah. Yeah.
Question from Zoom.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
So we've seen some images through other trains that we have, how invasive Eastern red cedar is, and how it's kind of taking over a lot of areas that used to have different vegetation on them. And so I'm curious how the fire management, because I think cedar is somewhat resistant to fire, but I'm kind of curious how the fire management would affect the spread of that, or slow the spread of the Eastern red cedar. And I also didn't really see the red cedar on your graph, or know where it fell on your graph between the the fire tolerant and the ones that are not fire tolerant.
So let me go, I'll put that up. Yeah, so Eastern red cedar is generally viewed as not fire tolerant. One of the important things is just like the thickness of bark. And cedar does not have very thick bark. It's likely to be girdled by a fire moving through the understory. They can, once they get larger, and that's actually the case with a lot of trees. Once they grow and get larger, they get more and more tolerant. to low severity fires. And then also they have lower limbs, so that can also carry fire up into their canopy. So as far as I'm aware, fires do a pretty decent job with getting rid of cedar, although, you know, it depends on what kind of fire. And I know that, you know, one of the challenges is that you're trying to thread the needle of getting it hot enough so that it's killing the species that you want to get rid of, but not letting it get out of control, right? And burning off onto somebody else's property, or potentially killing like older pine stuff that you want to retain on the site. So it's sort of a mix. You can see the eastern red cedar is this juvie, Juniperus virginiana, and you can see that it really gets going following the cessation of fire. You have a lot of establishment, and you can actually see sort of like the tops of the knobs here. If you go down and look at the aerial photograph today, that's where the cedar has really gotten established and taken over, are up on the dolomitic sort of calcareous part of the bald. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Burns probably have,
Mhm.
and the smaller cedars in the fire, they just.
Yeah. And then spread, right? Yeah, spread that fire to other trees around them. Yeah, so they're generally seen as fire intolerant, and they are like people sometimes refer to them as invasive. It depends on the scale you're looking at, right? Like, so you might say they're invasive because they weren't found in particular locations in a landscape historically. Maybe they would have just been found along streams or lower down, and then they've invaded those sites in the absence of fire. Yeah.
One begins to wonder though about insects like the woolly adelgid that destroyed so much forest in southern Virginia. You know, did that happen because fire was being spread, and otherwise they've been wiped out in the fire?
Yeah, that's that makes a lot of sense, and that's likely the case. It's, you know, it's hard to necessarily, you know, people have tried to use actually tree rings to go back and look at whether they had these insect outbreaks, like going back in history. But just in terms of like what we know about forests, if you have a forest absent fire, so like, for example, the southern pine beetle is an endemic species in the Southeast, affects shortleaf pine, a whole range of yellow pines, loblolly pine. And so it is likely that because these forests are now denser, the older trees are more stressed, they have less water, and that's one of the main things is they use resins to repel the insects, right? They're around, they're getting attacked, but if they have enough water, usually they can produce enough resin that will expel the beetles as they are working their way into the tree. And so, you know, again, it's like we have a sample size of one, right? Because all of the forests, for the most part, are suppressed. Now that we're starting to restore forests, that might be something that people could look at is, you know, is a restored forest like the one that I showed right here, is that more resilient to insect outbreaks than, you know, this dense forest like that? It probably is. And so again, that's another, you know, there are also arguments that, well, it's because of all the loblolly plantations that you have a lot more pine out there, and that has caused some of these bigger outbreaks. There also the hemlock woolly adelgid is an exotic invasive that was brought over from Europe. And so that probably would have the same effect regardless of kind of like the condition of forests, but it can make a forest more likely to be affected by insect outbreak.
Somebody's asked if you could share your contact information.
Yeah. Here, I'll go back to boring. Oh no, this is, yeah. There we go. So folks on Zoom, you can also go onto the UCA Geography website, and there my contact information is on there as well. We just moved into a new building this past year because ironically our old building burned. It was not me.
Okay, do you have a favorite pine tree?
Yeah, so Table Mountain pines, anybody know the Table Mountain pine, lowly Table Mountain pine? It's an Appalachian endemic and it's fire adapted. I worked on my dissertation work in Table Mountain pine forest. They've got interestingly serotinous cones and really thick bark. Serotinous cones are usually adapted to high severity fire, but these are kind of adapted to a mixed fire.
Okay. And do you have a favorite oak?
A favorite what?
Oak tree?
Oh,
You don't have to.
yeah, well, I guess I'll say post oak. I'll play to the crowd here in Arkansas. Yeah, I like post oak. I like white oaks. I like the bigger oaks than blackjack oaks. Yeah.
And do you have a favorite gift card you'd like?
Yeah, I would love. Actually, I'll do a Lowe's.
Okay.
I'll improve this, right? I'll let Candy as well. Yeah, thank you all very much.
Thankfully, we don't have to meet the
Yeah.
So you want to come the day as I go down and pay them the time to